My name is Clay Williams, and this is People Talks, presented by Canal Pursuit Productions. The idea behind People Talks is that everyone has a story, and everyone's story has value. People Talks is a mixture of people with lived experience and people who work in health and fitness fields, one speaker each week. This week's speaker is Kyle Rausch. Kyle says he got into fitness as a way to identify. He had no real calling. He was bullied quite a bit by a friend who insisted he would never amount to much. Through many life trials, he traveled overseas, found many mentors, and developed a mind-body approach to health and fitness, and cultivated a mindset of growth. He's been a personal trainer, life coach for over a decade, has over 20 certifications in leadership, fitness, and nutrition coaching. But he says the largest value he's received is the years of experience in the trenches, working one-on-one with people's anxieties, struggles, sense of self, and capabilities to transform their lives through fitness training. Welcome to People Talks, Kyle. I'm so glad that we could finally connect.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me here today, Clay. This is a fantastic opportunity to talk about something that I don't necessarily talk about in depth each day with each client, but it's definitely a very big factor in, I think, the quality of all of our lives. So when you suggest that everyone's got a story, I very much believe that everyone does have a story that will break your heart, and every one of their stories has brought them each to their knees at some point in some regard. And that's not to say that life isn't great and there's not a lot to pursue, but that being said, I think a lot of us are carrying around a shield, let's say, this shield of armor that doesn't necessarily want everyone to see what we're going through, except in this interesting time, COVID has definitely reared its ugly head and shown a lot of people that shield doesn't serve them much anymore. And, we can see it with the really high rates of depression and high rates of, and I don't mean to be so grim, but this is that conversation, right? The high rates of suicide and lots of things that are not progressive for us as people. So yeah, I'm excited to be here to dive into this stuff, and hopefully some of my experience can help anyone out there, and if it helps one person, then I believe we've served our cause here today.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the reasons that People Talks came about is recognizing that a lot of people have kind of similar stories, but they don't come out in everyday conversation. And
Right.
People who have gone through struggles have either found or developed, I say tools, I'm a mechanical engineering guy, but tools, techniques, mindsets, tips, something that helps them to cope, and some to survive and some to thrive. And we'd like to explore some of those and see if there are any tips that can be passed along from the survivor viewpoint, right?
Absolutely.
So yeah, with that, can you share some of your story? What got you to here today?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to dive into my story. And I think there's one thing that I don't really want to skip past. And it was something that you said on, the left brain side of things, the tool, so to speak, for our mental well-being and health. And I think it's really important to understand that your capacity to pick healthy thoughts is actually a habit. It is a skill. So if you want to call it a tool or this level of awareness, it is a practical thing that you can get reps and sets in with, right? And we talk about that in fitness, but the first repetition of you taking, oh, I'm a loser, I can't do this, into, you know what, this moment, this day, I'm going to do everything I can to try and help move my life forward, and the people, not only myself, but the people around me as well. And I'm an accountant by trade, initially, and I'm very analytical, and I initially wanted to go into mechanical engineering if me and my physics teacher didn't butt heads. But I think there's a lot of relevance to say that mental health, there are a lot of tools to be utilizing. And after I dive into my story, I think one that I can really identify with, and one that I work a lot with my clients with, is to learn what those tools are. So, I'll dive into me. I think you've covered a lot of the idiosyncratic stuff about my story. And, I did definitely experience some let's say, social clashing with a certain individual growing up. And I'm sure in reciprocation, I didn't make his life easy either. I'm fairly, type A and assertive. So I know there was moments when I didn't reciprocate his bullying well, and I probably made it worse for both him and myself. So, while I was bullied, quote unquote, I'm not entirely innocent here, and I think that's important to recognize. But so I started training out of spite, just to spite this individual and get myself into amazing shape. And when I was young and egotistical, it was all about the abs, and it was all about looking great and the vanity. And I think it would have been great if that's typically where your mental health comes from. But out of the snapshot after a workout, whenever I would get back to my life, a pretty intense amount of depression would set in. And I don't know if it's easy to say that I can resonate with everyone's depression. I think there's varying levels for sure, at least from, what I like to study and involve my, my intellectual side of study and things. I know that I probably haven't experienced some of the depths that other people have, but I can say that my own personal experience with depression was that I wasn't living in alignment with how I wanted to. Outside of being in the gym, I spent the vast majority of my time partying, smoking, drinking, skipping class, not going, and this was a good chunk of my college years. And, while many would say, oh, that's pretty normal as you mature, it's like, yeah, but I remember the distinct displeasure of not living in alignment with how I thought I should. And the weight that was holding. I hadn't realized, that I had become addicted to these things. Of course, I thought, as maybe all, but definitely me as a young man, thought that I was in control of my life at all times. And I don't think that was the case at all. I think those vices did pull me away from a lot of my, let's say, study goals, or my marks, or my outcomes in my courses, my capacities to make further connections. But I was actually, I was quite depressed, and I very much think it was because I was out of alignment with my goals. And I was very fortunate to stumble across one of, my mentors. And I would say mentors have been everything in my growth and development. Hats off to everyone who has really helped me along this journey, because it's been bumpy, and super grateful to all of you. If any of you listen to this, I could go on with some names, but we'll leave it at that. And Mike was my first real true mentor outside of my father. And he said, Kyle, all goals are the same. And I had no idea what he was talking about. I thought, he must have been more stoned than I was at the time, because I had no idea how to bicep curl my way to an accounting degree. It was illogical. I couldn't quite see what he was saying. And I barely scraped by. I functioned really well back then with my back up against a wall. And granted, to, not to beat myself into the ground, I had moments. I had courses, and I had semesters where I did really well. And I think that was almost harder when I was struggling, because I could see what my potential was. And then the semesters where I would get bogged down in emotional dysfunction, it was really hard to see the back and forth. But when I graduated, barely got by, skin in my teeth. And I sat down with Mike again. I said, Mike, I'm not loving what I was doing. At this point, I was an external auditor. I was doing financial statements for, a great company. And ultimately sat down. I said, Mike, I'm not loving what I'm doing. What should I do, man? You've been really helpful so far and been really kind to me. And he said, Kyle, what do you want to do? And I think that must have been the first time in my life where I actually contemplated what I had wanted. And, I think I followed this nuclear idea of go to high school, get the girlfriend, go to college, party, get the grades, get out of college, save the money, buy the house, have the kids, have the dog. And just, and this was kind of the mentality I was going through, but I lacked a lot of autonomy. I didn't feel as if they were my choices. I felt like I was living up to my family's expectations. So I said to Mike, I want to go overseas. I have a cousin who seems unbelievably happy every time I talk to her, and that's got to be nice. I'd like to be happy. And she was a teacher in Thailand, and they call Thailand the land of 1,000 smiles. And really interesting, beautiful place, beautiful people. Everyone's right up in your grill, and it's a very collectivistic culture, so they're very touchy, and it was a beautiful experience. But when in Rome, or, when in Thailand, I really wanted to see what this mindfulness thing was all about, and learn what, spirituality or inner connectedness really meant. And I think it's a complicated journey, let's say, from what I gathered in Thailand. Sure, we can talk presence for hours, and that anxiety lives in the future, and, all those things in the past. And presence is one factor, but then there's contemplative meditation, and there's, being able to step beyond your ego, and be a little bit more, selfless in your demeanor. And there's so many things to meditate upon that I don't believe it's very easy to define mindfulness, which I think is the first complicated part. But, I digress, of course, and I probably will do that many times in this interview. My point is, it's a long journey, and I did something proactive in that moment to better my life. And I chose a proactive step, which was to lean into some of my anxieties and discomfort, go and do something that was completely beyond my understanding.
And off the script, right?
Completely. And, I think there was some, not entirely, I saw my cousin do it. And I think in my generation, Y or X or Z or whichever one I'm a part of, I know I'm not a baby boomer, but, yeah, exactly. And I think I was somewhat following a mold, but I knew I didn't want to get on that plane and just, get to the beach and smoke joints, stare at the sky, get drunk, and just lose myself in the clouds. Like that wasn't what I was about. I got on the plane, and I read a book called The 4-Hour Work. From here to China to Thailand is about 23 hours in the plane. And I remember I felt that same level of frustration, that same level of like, I need to change my life because I'm not loving the way it's going. I'm not loving the outcomes I'm getting. And it seems like I'm not in a state of something called flow. I'm not enjoying what I'm experiencing every single day. And it was kind of in that moment after, I did a lot of self-development. I took a lot of courses, started reading a ton, which I didn't identify with before I'd left. And it was in that moment that I kind of realized that all goals are really similar. They do take a lot of persistence. They take a lot of focus. They take a lot of energy. And yeah, there's going to be a lot of ups and downs and a lot of struggle. But without those goals, I think a lot of substance of life for us as humans. And I can't speak for everyone, because I know there's a ton of different personalities out there that resonate differently with this kind of topic. But for me, not having important goals is a big factor in my own mental health. And I would say, as a final, side caveat, that there is no perfect process to you getting the remarkable outcomes in your life. A lot of people will emulate and say, Kyle, you've had tremendous success in fitness. And while I'm still very hard on myself, I get that as feedback sometimes. And I'm like, listen, if you can understand that you don't actually need to walk a perfect line to get the outcomes that you're looking for in life, whether it's, a nicer car, or, if your ambition is materialistic, if it's spiritual in nature, it doesn't have to be a perfect path. Neither does your fitness. And if you can get that, then I believe that you can find a lot more self-love in this process. So,
yeah, some forgiveness, self-forgiveness, that
right.
If you don't feel you're on the perfect path, well, there isn't really a perfect path. You're on a path and you're headed towards the goal, right?
Right.
Yeah, and goals are, I get you when you're talking about goals. I'm really goal focused. I've been struggling this past year with all of my regular races canceled. I run 50Ks and marathons and so on, and they're canceled. I don't have anything to train for. And I mean, I would race like 5 or 6 races a year, but to train for those, I've got to run all year. I've got to run 4 times a week. Without those races, it's a little bit of a struggle in the morning to put my running shoes on, especially in February, right?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. That's interesting. That was a very tough month for many of us, including myself. So
but I got a thing coming up in August, so I'm increasing my mileage again, so no worries.
Amazing. Man, that's so good.
Um, Something I've got to ask. You mentioned depression. Have you ever had a clinical diagnosis? Has it or a formal diagnosis of depression?
No,
No, okay.
no.
Yeah, a few people I've talked to are, for example, myself, I don't think I struggle with depression or anxiety. I think I might have Asperger's syndrome, which is a high functioning autism.
Mhm.
I'm very, very left brain. Sorry. Yeah,
Left
left
brain.
brain.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Very logical. I miss a lot of body language cues and
Sure.
socially awkward. I was just thinking today, much more socially awkward now that I'm out of practice, right?
Sure,
I saw
sure.
some friends yesterday for the first time in a long time, and it
Mhm,
felt a
mhm.
little funny. It's like standing right in front of them instead of with a screen between us.
Sure.
Um, but I've at my age, at my point or my place in life, there's no value in me getting even seeking a formal diagnosis. I know who I am. I know what I do and how I think. So there's not really a necessity for it, right?
Hmm. No,
Um,
absolutely. In reassurance, Clay, if you are considered to be quote unquote on the spectrum, personally, I haven't, and I'm pretty. I'd say one of my personal gifts that I'm far better at, it's not accounting, is being able to read and identify with people, and I don't get the energy or the suggestion that you have any. I mean, I think we're all socially awkward to some semblance, but
yeah,
in reassurance, if you think you are on the spectrum, I didn't notice, and I've enjoyed my time with you so far.
all right. So far, we're about halfway through the talk. So.
Yeah, right. Sure.
um, One of the things that we like to focus on in people talks
Mhm.
is not just the people's story, but some of the things they may have learned in in the trenches, right?
Yeah,
And
right.
during those struggles, during those dark times, some of the little tools or tricks or techniques that have helped them, yeah, out of a dark place or through a place where there wasn't very much hope. And this opens up a really wide open area, but
Sure.
what are some of the since you deal with a lot of people, what are some of the common things that you see that you might be able to give some of our audience some, I wouldn't say tips, but hope that there's a way through.
Yeah, I think there is definitely a way through. I don't know if it's an easy way
Mm-hmm.
through. Um, Mainly because what I try and stand for and what I try and coach people into so they can have a really great quality of life. Like I said, there's no perfect experience, and I don't think there's perfect people. So I think we're all going to have our lows and we'll all have our highs. Being able to manage and go through them differently is usually what I believe people are looking for or what people may need.
Mm-hmm.
Hard for me to tell everyone what they need, but
Oh, yeah, for sure.
yeah, I would say there's some pretty common themes that happen for us. And when we look at the health and fitness space, a lot of people can go about it in two different ways. I have my lovely, partner in life. She's amazing. I love her to death. She's a nurse, and she deals on the reactive side of health and well-being. And I am a wellness and personal trainer, wellness coach and personal trainer. And I would say I deal with the proactive
Mm-hmm.
side of physical health. And while I would say just physical health, a lot of what I do in order for people to take the right steps comes down to their emotional and their mental well-being.
Mm-hmm.
Because if people wanted to have a ton of energy, a great looking body, sleep really well, have a ton of patience, good energy, it's a really simple process, but it doesn't actually work that way
Mm-hmm.
because of all of our mental, blocks,
Mm-hmm.
truthfully. So I think you are the sum total of your habits, and breaking and changing those habits can be very difficult. right? Especially when we live in the world where we think that overnight we're supposed to develop some sort of total character shifting resilience and capacity to completely better our lives with the snap of a snap of a finger. So if you've never exercised before, or if you've never meditated before, or if you've never even considered having tea, right? These little things, they're really hard to maintain if they're not a norm in your life. Right. And I think the biggest conversation is the patience behind shifting habits. That's one of the hardest conversations, because people are like, okay, I got 3 weeks, or I got 6 months, or I got 3 months. I want to look like that guy on that picture, make it happen. And I'm like, that's not how it works. Right. And as much as I want to market that to you so I can sell more of the things that I create, it's just not the reality of health and human change. So, I would love to fly into an experience I had with a number of different clients, but I had a client, no names, just to keep it anonymous, because I haven't had their blessing in this. I have shared their story many times, but to be candid, it's only fair. I would say I had someone who was 350 plus pounds. They had a brain virus called encephalitis, which is an intense amount of inflammation on the brain, and ultimately put this individual into multiple comas. They had to relearn almost all of their motor functioning. They were on 30 plus medications. They were very obese. Anxieties were through the roof. They had to lock the fridge on this individual because they were eating themselves, further and further into decline. And the mentality was highly reactive in nature. More medicine, more surgeries, more, isolation and lockdown and boxes. And ultimately, I think there was a pretty interesting shift, because I tried to encourage this individual not to completely come off of their medication, but to consistently be consulting with their physicians and their doctors as we tried to apply more holistic, progressive, proactive measures, exercise, dietary changes, mental affirmation changes, thought viruses, and that's a whole different separate conversation, so we can fly into that world. But ultimately, alongside of working with their doctors, every single time she would lose 10 to 15 pounds, I would say, hey, go and see if you can come off of this medication. 10, 15 pounds, go and see if you can come off of any of your medication. And not being a physician or any background in pharmacology, all I had was the intention for her to grow into a healthier individual by using healthy means, weight training, drinking lots of water, trying to focus on sleeping well, trying to use proactive approaches to mental health and physical health. So, this individual has, I think, is about 195 pounds now. She's off of all of her medication. She wasn't statistically supposed to be alive right now. And I think it's that situation where you can truly see what had happened a lot of the time. Now, they had a tremendous amount of PTSD with nurses, with any kind of hospital medical care at all. A ton of PTSD with taking on their own tasks themselves, because everyone was doing everything for them for so long. And every time they would test the individual, they would freeze up. They get very anxious, so it would say, how many fingers am I holding up? And she would just immediately freeze. So what I noticed is that it's not that she was even cognitively assessing the questions that I was asking and that people were asking. It's that she was too afraid to try. So my first, month, 3 months, 6 months of working with this individual was to help her realize when she was becoming anxious, when she was becoming highly emotional, realizing and having more self-awareness around her state. Right. So we know this when we have cravings for something, chips, beer, cigars, pornography, any kind of highly pleasurable experience at all, you'll have these triggered, anxious emotions where you crave things. So that's, I believe, one form of anxiety. The other one is obviously, very obvious panic attacks, heart racing, sweating, those kinds of things. And then I think there's minor forms where we become very acutely, but very short-term afraid. And when someone puts you on the spot, or I say, hey, you want to go public speak, or you want to go and do something outside of your comfort zone. And I think that's another form. And there's probably many that I'm not addressing here, but a really important thing to identify, because I believe those anxieties limit us from being able to take more appropriate steps forward. So, you know, to make this very simple, I'm going to go over to the whiteboard here. I don't know. I think you are recording the video. So if you'd like to keep this, that would be, fantastic for the viewers and the people that can utilize this. I'm just going to bring my webcam over with me, and let's see how well the visual is here. What does that look like for you? Is that screen relatively clear?
Yeah, that's pretty good for sure.
Okay. So I think all health, physical, mental, spiritual, I believe that it is all massively interlinked. Okay. Going for a run, and I'm sure you're a big advocate of this, Clay, the endorphin release after a run, whether it's even a 10-minute run, a 30-second jog, energy walking, any kind of cardio experience, releases endorphins, releases a lot of feel-good chemicals, neurotransmitters that just makes you feel a million times better. Okay, so it's very obvious to see that any kind of even light exercise very much shifts how we feel. So to say that physical health and mental health aren't highly correlated is a mistake. I think they are. If you don't believe me, then go out and try it and see what all of these runners are loving these days, the runner's high that they get and the intense amount of flow that they can experience. I'm going to try and see if I can get more into the camera. Yeah, there we go. So, physical and mental are very much interlinked. Okay. That's my experience. I could be wrong. I'm not trying to speak as gospel here. I think these two are massively coordinated. Okay.
Sure.
Spirituality, that's a whole different world, and it's not one that's easily articulated well. I don't want to confuse this with religion. I think spirituality is a very different thing. It's understanding a little bit more in depth of what you experience, right? And that's a complicated one. And I think this is a journey that people should go down themselves in self-study, whether it's looking into the various different disciplines of, becoming more spiritual. I think they all are interlinked. To save the confusion, I'll just go with these two. So your gut actually is connected to your brain through a nerve called the vagus nerve. It goes all the way up and down from your gut to your brain. And if you have any kind of inflammation in your stomach, you can experience this in your cognition or your consciousness as brain fog, fatigue, frustration, anger, anxiety. So the idea of you are what you eat is 100% correlated through this nerve called your vagus nerve. And the more often you eat unhealthy food, the more correlated or likely you are to experience high levels of anxiety, poor, low frequency, low state emotions like anger, resentment, spite, anxiety, and they are all actually interlinked in a very similar section of the brain. But as you start to clean up your diet, let's say, and make healthier protein choices or drink more water or try and sleep more, there's a really strong correlation with your mental health improving dramatically. Okay. Now that's one thing. Okay. Physical, mental health. Now I want to lean on, in these two things being interlinked. And if that's the case, then we can start going through the physical checklist of how to improve your fitness. And likely what it's going to do is also improve your mental health. So what are some of these things? Well, it's water, right? And I can go into the details there, but it's sleep. It's definitely connection with other people. Okay. And we're going to unpack that one, I think, at the end here. It's exercise. Okay. And there's a world of things that can benefit your experience in life. Okay. And as you do these things, it should improve your mental health. Now, this is the proactive approach, the difficult approach towards improving your life, because If you went on the reactive side of things, we can start to go into things, and I hope I'm spelling this properly, volume, or we can go into high amounts of food or alcohol or TV or internet. And while none of these things are wrong or poor choices or not helpful in acute circumstances, I think all of them have value in certain ways, but these don't actually improve your life. Mm-hmm. They numb your life. Okay. And there's a big difference between improvement and numbing. Okay. So to solve this middle section, anxiety, depression, anxiety, depression, mental health, to really talk about this, it's the difference between solving it with a reactive thing or solving it with a proactive thing. Mm-hmm. Okay. The proactive thing is an investment. It takes time. You have to work on your social relationships, your emotional health with those people. You have to, if you have a difficult relationship with someone, you have to talk it out. You have to make amends. You have to dig into the work of the discrepancies and the differences of what happened. And I think this stuff is difficult. And I think that's why they call it, in my opinion, the hero's journey. It's difficult to do the things that are best for us long-term, even though these things, while very much solve the problem quite quickly, they don't really give us the best outcome. I don't know, and I can't speak for everyone on this, but every time I eat something unhealthy, while it's amazing in its moment, and I definitely still do, and I always will, maybe that's hard to say, absolutes are hard for me, always eat unhealthy food or have a drink with my friends or watch some TV or be on the internet and find those things joyful, I don't necessarily feel like my life has moved forward. Mm-hmm. I don't necessarily feel like my life has gotten better by experiencing these highly reactive solutions for anxiety. And I think that is the problem. So it's not that any one exposure of these things is a problem. It's that chronic exposure of these things. And this being your solution always to this problem makes it worse and worse and worse and worse. Mm-hmm. So I don't believe that depression is this moment in time. I don't believe that depression is this thing that we're all experiencing because of COVID. It's COVID happened. So we created a lot of anxiety around it. A lot of us, including myself, have made choices that we have not necessarily wanted to. And as we continue to make poor choices, we get deeper and deeper and deeper into feeling regretful or self-loathing or hard on ourselves about these poor choices for our lives. Mm-hmm. And I believe this is what I was experiencing with my initial story about not living in line with my goals, right? Not showing up to school on time, I was still going to work and hitting the bare minimums in life, but I believe and try to hold myself to a pretty high standard. And I think this stuff, if you can really learn to build these as your go-to habits on a regular basis, it's not fun. It's not sexy. It's not what you want to do all the time with your life. Eating quinoa and broccoli with a little bit of mustard and, having some tofu because it's, that's the dietary style that I'm experimenting with right now. That's nowhere near as exciting as Kentucky Fried Chicken, mm-hmm. Right? KFC is way better. And I miss popcorn chicken like crazy from McDonald's, but I know that having the first choice, while it's nowhere near as sexy, is going to give me a much better outcome. Mm-hmm. Right? So I think this is the proactive and reactive model, right? The reactive stuff works, and so does the proactive stuff. I find the proactive stuff harder to get involved with habitually, and the reactive stuff very simple and very quick as a solution, but never really truly makes our lives better. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the proactive approach gives you more choices, right? Opens up more possibilities or potential for you, and the reactive choices are taken because your choices are running out.
That's it.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So completely understand that.
Here's the conversation that a lady named Brene Brown brings to the table, and she's got a doctorate in social work. She's written some really profound books and has some amazing conversations and talks. She's helped salespeople tremendously, CEOs and high executive staff, and they're functioning tremendously. But here's the conversation, okay? There's nothing wrong with you for picking either of these choices, okay? We all have availability to legally pursue any one of them. But what often happens is when we take the good or the bad perspective is when we start to either weigh each other in society for making the difficult choices, or really weighing and being hard on ourselves and holding up that shield and hiding from each other and only putting our best foot forward and not even admitting to these unhealthy choices. And we start to label ourselves with shame words like bad and dumb and stupid and loser for making these reactive choices, because we know every single time we do them that it diminishes our sense of self a little bit. Not a lot, but a little bit, right? At least that's the way I feel. So here's what I took from Brene Brown. Shame is probably one of the most difficult burdens to bear. And I think we do it a lot to ourselves when we're not making ideal choices and when we can't pursue our goals well, which is something we've all been experiencing over the course of COVID, being restricted. So if we look at some psychological literature, this is us. Okay, we're a circle. I'm a circle, you're a circle, everyone's a circle of some sorts. Now, this is because psychology is extremely cyclical. Okay, we're going to have days where we're really high, and for some reason or another, we're just going to experience some fatigue. And there's other models and other talks that I would love to get into, but I think this base model is really helpful for us. So if you're like me, when you're up here, you're really excitable, you're talkative, you're playful, life is great, you're having the time of your life. And if you're on the low of your psychology, you're frustrated, you're nitpicky, you're impatient, you're highly critical, you're escapist, you don't necessarily want to be pursuing all of these proactive things to improve your life. That's me at my low. Okay. So my challenge for a lot of my clients when I first start working with them is like, you're on this wheel and you're not getting off. Now you can change what you do when you get down here so you don't make it worse. And you can change the impact of this and not take it as personally, right? I think a lot of us take our emotions very seriously, as if just because you're angry, you're now justified to make all of these unhealthy choices, be emotionally unhealthy to others, a lot of other things. But this is what happens, okay? When you get down here, this is my challenge for all of my clients at the beginning and throughout the course of our relationship. Not if you get down here, but when you get down here, can you be stoic? Okay. So stoicism is this idea of mental toughness, of taking the road less traveled, of leading into adversity, of trying to do the more proactive, healthy steps. Can you be stoic when life throws you some curveballs and things get hard, and when you're running out of your spiritual energy and your emotional energy? And not if you can't, but when you can't, can you like yourself? Okay. And I think if you can develop a sense of self-respect when you make unhealthy reactive choices, which all of us do at some point, I believe that if you can improve the relationship with yourself, you won't have to get as stuck in these highly addictive, highly hard reactive solutions for depression. And this is Brene Brown's work is like learning self-compassion, getting involved in not numbing, practicing joy and gratitude, and actively trying to lean into those emotions instead of numbing and self-loathing. So that's the difference. It's like, if you can get into this and be totally aware, you're like, man, I just experienced, isolation for the past month. A very close family member just committed or tried to commit suicide. I mean, I'm going to give you some grim pictures right now. I just got fired. 3 people that I know got laid off from their job. People are getting sick from COVID all over the place. By the way, this isn't fictional story. This is actually just the truth of my life currently. And on Monday, that day was hard for me. Okay. Mm-hmm. But what I've really worked on is learning to like myself so that I don't have to get there Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Mm-hmm. Right, over the course of this experience. And This, I believe, is the baseline model that most of us, if we live in more ideal, proactive ways, will likely have less anxiety, less depression, less frustration. Not none, right? You'll always have those moments, I think, unless, of course, you really focus on improving your well-being, and that's just promised stuff from spiritual gurus that you're very wishful and hopeful in your thinking. Hopefully, I'll get to a state where I'm never frustrated and depressed and anxious ever again. Okay,
that's like holding the perfect yoga pose, right?
Right.
You approach it. I'm not sure you ever get there.
Yeah, and I've had some really interesting spiritual teachers and mentors suggest that they don't carry any depression or anxiety with them at all, and haven't in many, many, many years, but did in their past. So I want to believe in these people and what they're suggesting, because if that is the journey and you can't arrive, then that's a wonderful thing. But I think for most of us, this probably resonates a little bit more to say that you're going to experience highs and lows. Your psychology is extremely cyclical. You're going to have the best of who you are and your best foot forward, and you're going to have your shoes shine and your hair done up nice. And then 3 days later, it's going to be rock bottom. You know, you don't want to get out of bed and you don't want to talk to anyone around you, and you're ashamed and embarrassed based on your previous choices. And, you know, I think we've all experienced what drinking too many beers does. You know, maybe it's 3 for some, or 1.5 for another, or 15 for a party animal, right? But when we wake up the next day, it's like you can actually feel the difference, right? For me, this is a big reason why I stopped drinking. You know, I haven't, I will occasionally if I go up to a cottage or something, and I definitely will feel it the next day, right? It could be 3 at this point, you know, 3 beers in, and the next day I feel a little fuzzy. I might be a little bit more like low energy, right? And that's because unhealthy things have unhealthy outcomes on your psychology. So, you know, I don't mean to beat a dead horse here. I think the best thing that you could possibly take away from this is when you hit your low and when you want to make unhealthy choices, can you be strong, make good choices? And when you can't, not if you can't, when you can't, can you continue to like yourself so it doesn't bury you?
Right on. Yeah. It's okay to not be okay. I mean, there's going to be times when you're not okay.
Right.
And you have to realize those times, and it's okay to be there. But like you say, recognize it and be okay with it. It's going to come around.
Sure.
Yeah.
You know, I think that's the hard part is, in my experience, is trying to have patience for it to come around. You know, and I think the scary part is that it doesn't necessarily always come around. And that's, I think, what we're starting to experience while we're all at home, able to study the grim thoughts in our heads with Google.
Yeah.
Right. It's very easy if you don't have a purpose and you're going to work to look up how many deaths from COVID this week, or, you know, how many suicides, or what's the rate of unemployment, or just watch the news and be scared for the next 3 hours, because that's likely what you're going to experience from watching it. It's scary stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. We had a little conversation before I started recording. We were talking about the news, the bad news. I recently wrote a magazine article about what's in the news, and I receive, because I'm a mental health advocate, I receive links to news articles all the time, right? This is about mental health, the current state of mental health. And honestly, 90% of the headlines I see are bad news about mental health. And I have to admit, I just kind of skim over those ones. And if I see a headline that looks like any kind of hope, or successful research or something, I'll go in depth into those articles. But
absolutely,
there's a ton of bad news in the news, and that's got to have a toll. That's got to take a toll on people, right?
Absolutely, it does. Yeah. You know, I would recommend that you actually don't watch the news. You know, I don't consume it at all. The only thing I do consume is the social I hear from the people around me. So if something is very important and there's transitions, like I had no idea from the news that vaccination was possible. I know from all the people that I've spoken with that vaccination is possible, and that, you know, I'm up next, and whatever that comes, you know, I'd be happy to participate in something far beyond my understanding. It's a very, we'll stay away from the politics, of course, but because it's very complicated, and far beyond my understanding. I would say that this anxiety that is COVID has really gripped us intensely as a society. And I think it is putting our states of awareness into this grim expression on a consistent basis. So to say that COVID is actually making us more depressed is different than our focus on COVID making us more depressed. I very much think, and this is my, a bold statement, so a lot of people can very much disagree with this. And if you do,
I'll have your address at the end of the video.
Yeah, sure. My stance is that I believe that people struggled far before COVID.
Oh yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
I believe that people were going through a lot, and it was difficult even for me before COVID. And I say even for me, it's difficult now. I would say that, but what you focus on grows. And if you want to continuously obsess about this very unfortunate, not great progressive disease that's on the planet right now, if you focus on it for too long, it will definitely directly affect your psychology. And I often will get into the elevator with people and they'll say, yeah, so how you doing? And I'm like, amazing. Yeah, what's going on with you? And they're like, yeah, COVID. And I'm like, you know what? And I've been a little short with some people, which is not fair to them, but I'm just like, hey, you know what? I'm really excited for when we no longer have to talk about this. So what are you up to this week? Right. And I try and create some different social currency, but I think
one thing you said about COVID, as the point that you're on, the focus on COVID is what's causing, let's say even accentuating current conditions, right? People that were already struggling beforehand are struggling more. And it just reminded me of one of the most often misquoted Bible verses. It's money is the root of all evil. And that's misquoted. It's the love of money is the root of all evil. Right. So it's not the COVID, it's the way we're dealing with it and focusing on it, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I've seen some incredible things come out of this. I've built an organization online, right, where I'm indifferent. It's a journey, but I've done a lot of really impressive things, even to myself. I'm not trying to say and posture or anything. I've been impressed with how well I've been able to cope. That being said, I have not coped perfectly. It has been a struggle in many ways. And I've seen other people, completely change and flip and lose a bunch of weight and pick up skills and do all these really interesting things. So I think the opportunities are there. Maybe you now have extra time to cultivate a skill, play the guitar, start painting, work on you a little bit. And I think those are much more progressive ways to express yourself than to continuously leaning into these unhealthy reactive habits.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. In closing, I think there is something that might really help people right now. I recently just had a very important person in my life attempt to commit suicide. And I looked into it. I'm a bit of a nerd. I like to read, and I think it's very important, especially the psychological literature. I think it's fascinating. There's 3 means at which are almost guaranteed in almost every case of suicide. And don't quote me on this, but I believe that we can probably all resonate with this. First, you need lethal means. So you need a cliff, you need a rope, you need drugs, you need a knife, and not to make it grim. So sorry, I know that's not the intention here, but that's the first. The second is to feel like you're more of a burden to the people in your life. So you not being around would benefit them. That's the second means. The third is thwarted social contact. So the incapacity to have emotional relationships with people in your life. Okay, so those are the 3 criteria for all suicide attempts to have taken place, either impulsively or planned. And the literature had suggested that the vast majority of everyone we've studied, and there's been thousands, that those 3 criteria are in place. So my encouragement in closing, because I think, depression is definitely skyrocketing and suicide is definitely going up a ton right now, especially in men. And not that this isn't a a female conversation or a woman's conversation, or, you know, I hope I'm using appropriate pronouns and words here to be politically correct to help the most amount of people. But I would say that if that's the case and we are struggling more, then we need to do better as a society to recognize when people are starting to feel like they're a burden and when they've been isolated for too long, because we are being isolated for far too long right now, many of us. And we're not only being isolated, we're encouraged to stay isolated. So
we're legislated to stay isolated.
Right. So not to get super aggressive into the politics, because that's not my realm. It's not my world. And I don't believe I have the experience or intellectual capacity to argue in that frame. But what I would 100% say is that as a society, we can very much do our best to make and read and identify when the people that we care about are feeling that they're burdensome to us, and when they are feeling very disconnected emotionally. And if you can pick up on those two things, I very much think you can save the people in your lives from something catastrophic. And, you know, I wish I'd picked up on some of these signs in my own life. I'm very fortunate that this individual wasn't successful, and that's a whole different, you know, can of worms to unpack. But what I would say is, you know, we're all going through this. And that to me sometimes makes it easier to know that, you know, you're not alone.
Yeah.